All right, we're in the last one of March 30th. MBS, KFEL, Denver, Monday, March 30th, 1942, 7:15 to 7:30 p.m. Mountain West Time. And we're here with an analysis of propaganda by Siegfried Wagener. Good evening. Radio time. Tonight, yours truly has reason to celebrate. The voice which comes out of your loudspeaker does not come from Denver, as in previous broadcasts, but direct from the mutual KFEL listening post at the foot of one of the highest mountains in Colorado, Long's Peak, right there. For the first time, I speak to you from the silence of the deep forest which looks at me through every window of this log cabin. The pines and spruce trees and leafless, quaking aspens stand out there like sentinels in the deep snow, in the blue light of an early moon. Over by the fireplace, which has been put out of a huge boulder reaching from the floor to the ceiling and from the wall to wall, my good friends and neighbors from Allen's Park and Estes Park have congregated to witness the inauguration of these broadcasts from what is perhaps the highest point in the United States from which a regular network program originates. Amen. Now we're on the internet, and this is on YouTube. From the highest point in the Rocky Mountains, unless somebody crawls to the top like I did last time, I read from the very top of about 12,000 feet on the pass. I think the occasion warrants it to fulfill a request by the boys at the Air Corps Advanced Flying School, Turner Field, Albany, Georgia, whose spokesman, Emmett Deadman, has written me for a picture of this listening post. I have lots of pictures, and I showed him in the beginning. But he's going to describe it with his words. I shall do so by telling the story and by describing the setting here. But first, let me quote from Mr. Deadman's letter. He wrote, "Your broadcast tonight about rumors was highly explosive itself, and I suspect it may have caused Mr. Goebel similar emotions to those produced by the sight of RAF planes over Berlin. So the next time you are on the air, you may remember the boys who are going to take the bombs over are listening, and they're hoping the men and women behind the lines will listen to and realize what Hitler is trying to do with the words as well as with wars. Bombs for the propaganda strategist in Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo, that. It is the job of mutual KFEL listening post. The peaceful setting here on my ranch at Tahosa Valley is deceiving." I mean, it's just beautiful here. He's waging a war with his mouth and his typewriter all around the planet against Hitler. And I'm taking up the charge, blowing the trumpet. I think the occasion warrants it to fulfill a request by the boys at the Air Corps Advanced Flying School at Turner Field in Albany, Georgia, whose spokesman, Emmett Deadman, has written me for a picture of this listening post. I shall do so by telling the story and by describing the setting here. But first, let me quote from Mr. Deadman's letter. Deadman's letter? He wrote, "Your broadcast tonight about rumors was highly explosive itself, and I suspect it may have caused Mr. Goebel similar emotions to those produced by the sight of RAF planes over Berlin. So the next time you're on the air, you may remember the boys who are going to take the bombs over are listening, and they're hoping the men and women behind the lines will listen to and realize what Hitler is trying to do with words as well as with wars. Bombs for the propaganda strategist in Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo, that is the job of mutual KFEL listening post. The peaceful setting here on my ranch in Tahosa Valley is deceiving. From early morning when first light of dawn breaks over the crag of Deer Ridge to late at night when the moon goes to bed behind the Continental Divide, this staccato noise of shortwave stations in all parts of the world fills this house. Powerful shortwave receivers bring them in, and whenever the voices say something of more than ordinary interest, a typewriter begins to click, and the message is translated into English and put down in black and white. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine, the God of angel armies, who's always by my side. Are listening, and they're hoping the men and women behind the lines will listen to and realize what Hitler is trying to do with words as well as with wars. Bombs for the propaganda strategist in Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo. That is a job of mutual KFL listening post. The bombs of his words. The peaceful setting here on my ranch in Tahosa Valley, which is right here, is deceiving. From early morning when the first light of dawn breaks over the crag of Deer Ridge to late at night when the moon goes behind the Continental Divide, the staccato noise of the shortwave stations in all parts of the world fills this house. Powerful shortwave receivers bring them in, and whenever the voices say something of more than ordinary interest, a typewriter begins to click, and the message is translated into English and put down on black and white. Often while listening to the enemy in the heat of the everlasting mental battle, a counter-argument comes to mind, and that is written down too. To make the enemies of democracy and human decency eat their words and make them swallow hard, and that is first and chief aim of the propaganda analysis. When I first came to this region nearly 10 years ago, after the Depression had wiped out my newspaper job in Chicago, there was somewhere in my mind the idea tucked away that a fellow could sit on a mountaintop, so to speak, like now, and yet participate in the battle of the world, like now. And I knew then that the great struggle of today was shaping up, and I wanted to be in it. But coming to Tahosa Valley, I did not try to run away from it. I had been in that battle from childhood on, first in the World War, and then in the German Revolution, and later in the doom and gloom of the post-war Europe, and finally in this country during the boom years and the Depression. If there was one lesson I had learned from these experiences, it was that no one can gain a clear picture of the milling crowd by being right in it. A little distance, a little isolation, and a measure of peace and tranquility are absolutely essential to come to a sober, constructive conclusions about this world in which we live and fight. For a number of years, I lived alone with my dog Tom in the old homestead cabin of my dear and great friend Charles Edwin Hughes, the poet of the Rockies, whose pure, beautiful Christianity and irrepressible American optimism had been my first inducement to make my permanent home in the Rocky Mountains. Many were the days in the deep mountain winters when he and other kindred spirits and I gathered around his fireplace to contemplate the state of the world, far from the haunts of man, but with every ounce of our blood right in the battle. There was the coming of Hitler, presaged and by ominous sign in the sky, and there was the tortuous road of events until the final clash between barbarianism and civilization occurred. But not even up here, among these majestic mountains, was a fellow far enough removed from the claws of Hitler to be left alone. A day came for me when a car with a diplomatic license plate from Washington drove into my yard. Out of it stepped two staff members of the Nazi embassy, and for the first time I was face to face with the enemy of America and the democratic world, with the enemy of America and my world. I didn't have any connections with Hitler in Germany. I didn't want to have anything to do with that country. Here I lived in the innermost heart of America, was a free man among free men. But the enemy fooled me even here and tried to make me disloyal to my hard-won new country. I didn't have any connections with the Hitler Germany at all. Let those among us, by way of isolationism and defeatism, still fall for Hitler's propaganda, contemplate that for a moment. These enemy agents came straight into my house, sat down by my hearth, and politely let me know that it would be best for me to become a traitor to the United States and a fifth columnist for Hitler. The sanctity of my American home meant nothing to them. My integrity as a decent human being was brushed aside as if it did not mean a thing to me. Yes, they were polite, but that was only a flimsy mask. Behind it, I could feel and sense an abyss of brutality and cynicism that made my hand shake with the desire to reach for my gun or a club or anything which to drive these Nazis from my grounds. That was in 1935. We are not at war, and there were very few people among us Americans who thought it possible that someday we would have to fight these very same Nazis who invaded my home. I have had to be polite, and I wanted to draw them out. They had me at a disadvantage there, but they did teach me how it feels to meet the enemy in my American home. They taught me in that short hour what it would mean to you and me if we had to look helplessly while their hordes made themselves at home in our land. They also taught me that there is no part of the United States safe from them once they gain the slightest foothold. They finally taught me that there is no other safeguard for us in our America than to attack them and attack again until their breed has vanished from the earth. Until their breed, the master race, has vanished from the earth. From that day on, I was more than ever in a fight against the Nazi. I had met him on my own ground, right in the heart of America, and from that ground, here, I proceeded to attack him with my mouth. There was no better ground for me to stand on. All around me for thousands of miles there is America, a glorious land, saturated with the spirit of liberty since the dawn of man. Here in the center of that glorious land, I feel strong, vigorous pulse of liberty every hour of day and night. It gives me the sustenance to carry the fight to the enemy and to attack him right among the American people who he cannot hope to defeat by his vicious, poisonous, and venerating propaganda. And so the mutual KFEL listening post here in Tahosa Valley at the foot of Longs Peak and in 8,300 foot latitude came about. It is located about 80 miles northwest of Denver, and it is broadcast go from here by telephone wires to Estes Park, 14 miles to the north, and from there to Denver. The engineers at KFEL tell me that this is one of the longest remote jobs in radio. However, it has been made possible through the fine cooperation of the Superintendent David Canfield of the Rocky Mountain National Park, who permitted us to use the National Park telephone line until snow retreats enough so that we can build a new line. Let me assure you then that this new arrangement gives me the chance of more and better concentration in my fight of the enemy propaganda. To all of you and to the boys at Turner Field, Georgia, I promise that I shall hit harder and ever harder while making them eat their words in Berlin and Tokyo and already vanquished Rome. To the hundreds of people who daily write the stations to which they are listening for a free copy of my biography, again, my heartfelt thanks for their interest. Due to the overwhelming number of requests, there may be a slight delay in mailing. But if you wish, you can have a free copy of tonight's talk. Just ask for it. Good night. So that was awesome, wasn't it? The first talk from up here. So the other ones you had to drive down to Denver.